Dear learners, I am Christina Georgy, your academic counselor. Let me take your attention towards the life and works of one of the greatest dramatists in the history of English literature. Who am I referring to? Any idea? Yes, correct. Thank you. Well done, Ajita. William Shakespeare. So, in this session, I'll take you on a journey to the England of Shakespeare's time, where you will be introduced to the social setting of the period as well as the changes that set in from the reign of Queen Elizabeth. We'll also trace briefly the evolution of the stage in Shakespeare's time. It will help you visualize the experience of theatre going in those days. And this will be followed by a discussion on the historical sources used by William Shakespeare for his particular play, Macbeth. Later, we will focus our attention towards Macbeth as such. So, are you ready? Okay. Yes, glad to hear that. So, let me provide you a general introduction to the life and works of William Shakespeare. This is not directly mentioned in your syllabus, but it would be very beneficial for you to have an understanding on this author as such, that is the playwright. From the examination point of view, it will help you prepare for the first paragraph, the general introduction on the play. It would probably be about William Shakespeare, right? Yes. So, William Shakespeare was born as the son of John and Mary Arden Shakespeare in a small town that is around northwest of London. You must have heard of this name, Stratford, right? Yes. So, he was born there. So, Shakespeare's birthday must be known to all of you. He was born on 23rd April 1564. And one interesting fact is that he died on the same date. His death also happened on the same date, that is 23rd of April. So, if you look at the works of William Shakespeare, he has contributed immensely to the English literature of that times. We can say that he has a literary output that consists of 37 plays, 154 sonnets, and 2 long poems. So, if we classify the works of Shakespeare, we can say that his first period, that is from his age of 26 to 30, it was more like an apprenticeship period. And the second period was when he mastered his art, that is, he explored the subgenre of romantic comedy. So the third period is where the problem of evil in the world was addressed through his writings, and the fourth period created a new dramatic form. You must have heard of tragicomedy, right? A particular play in which traces of both tragedy and comedy are present. Such plays can be called as tragicomedies. So, have you heard of any of Shakespearean plays? Can you name a few in the chat box? Yes. You must have studied that as part of your schooling, right? Yes. Anything else? So, I'll help you have an idea. That is, Shakespeare wrote histories, comedies, and tragedies during his lifetime. So, some of the historical plays by Shakespeare include Richard III, Richard II, King John IV, Henry IV, Henry VIII, etc. And speaking about the comedies, you must have heard about Shakespeare's play As You Like It, right? Some of you must have studied also. So this particular play comes under the romantic comedy genre. The other major plays of this period or other major plays of this genre include The Merchant of Venice, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Much Ado About Nothing, etc. among many others. About the tragedies, you must have certainly heard of Romeo and Juliet, then Julius Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra. At least you must have heard of all these, right? So do you know some of the greatest tragedies written by Shakespeare? How many are there and which are they? Any idea? The greatest tragedies of Shakespeare. Yes, Othello, correct. Yes. Do you know the number? How many are there? Hamlet is correct. Yes. Anything else? No, Romeo and Juliet is not considered as the greatest tragedy. The text that we are studying, yes, Ajita, correct, Macbeth. And there is one more. Have you heard of this play titled King Lear? Yes, Shasa. Yeah, you guessed it right. So, I'm glad to see all those responses. So, we can say that there are four major tragedies. There are four major tragedies written by William Shakespeare, and these are namely Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. So it might be difficult for you to remember this. So one tip that I used to follow when I was a student is that I used this acronym HOKM. H for Hamlet, O for Othello, K for King Lear, and M for Macbeth. So will you be following the same from today? Yes, so that will certainly help you remember the four main tragedies written by William Shakespeare. HOKM. Can somebody put that in the chat box also so that the others could also follow? HOKM. Okay. It would be great if you could expand also. Yes. So we all know that Shakespeare belonged to the Elizabethan era. What do you know about the Elizabethan era? This was the period of time in English history ruled by Queen Elizabeth. Alright, so let's have an idea regarding the Elizabethan world, mainly the Elizabethan England. So let me focus your attention to the word Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth or awakening. So it was a period of rebirth with respect to classical Greek and Latin literature. That is, people began to focus their attention towards the old classics, especially classical Greek and Latin literature. So Renaissance can be traced back to the latter half of the 16th century. What do you mean by that? The second half of the 16th century. So it has been divided into early, middle, and late Renaissance. Renaissance is an important concept that you will have to remember with respect to the Elizabethan era. I'll explain HOKM, Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. Yes. So as we mentioned, the Renaissance period was marked by a relook at the classics, and this in a way helped the writers of this time posit a new idea of man who was the center of the scheme of things. Remember the humanist idea that we discussed in our last class? Yes. So the idea of Renaissance gradually spread to the different parts of the world, and later development in scientific ideas also came into vogue. One important person to mention here is Copernicus. He was the person to prove that Earth was not the center of the universe, but that it was the sun which is the center of the universe, and that Earth was only a planet revolving around the sun. So this was an era of changes. Which is the era mentioned? Yeah, the era of Queen Elizabeth. That is the Elizabethan era. So the authority of the church was challenged by King Henry VIII. Do you know why this happened? This was because King Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife, Catherine of Aragon. So why was this happening? This was just to marry Anne Boleyn. So he wanted to marry another woman. For that matter, he wanted to divorce his wife. But the problem during those times was that the Catholics were not permitted to divorce. Alright, so divorce appeared to be the issue that is not permitted under Catholicism. So as a result, this led to what is known as the period of Reformation and the establishment of the Protestant faith. So this is how the Protestant faith got established, as if a revolt against the authority of the church. Alright, yes. So this was followed by a move to restore the power of the church through the Counter-Reformation. When Reformation happened, there also took place Counter-Reformation. So this resulted in the split in the church. So how did this get separated? That is, one part or one sector of Catholicism and the other sector of Protestantism emerged. So under Queen Elizabeth, England moved towards various levels of social mobility. England was gradually transforming itself into a world of mercantile capital. The consolation of power by Elizabeth could be seen in the works of literature as well. Very often we say literature is the mirror to social reality. Remember the mention of the realist works that we discussed in our last class? Yes. So some of these literature include Sidney's Arcadia, written in 1580, Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene, written in 1590. And if we look at the history, then the defeat of Spanish forces, the Spanish Armada, took place in the year 1588. So this further helped Queen Elizabeth to consolidate her reign. So we can say that the period of Elizabeth's rule was relatively stable. Nevertheless, there were changes at the level of both social and economic structures. The conception of man in society and its representation in literature also underwent immense changes. So in a more scientific environment, the individual man came to be the center of things. Alright, so that was about the brief historical background of the Elizabethan era. Now let's have a quick mention regarding the humanist thought. Didn't I tell you that man became the center? Yes. So the chief ideas that the Renaissance brought included man's relationship with God as a subject of artistic and literary depiction. That is, humanism explored man in terms of his relationships with the people around. So humanism can therefore be looked as a movement that restored to man the dignity of existence. Immense importance was placed on man, or man was to be seen, observed and looked at in terms of his relationship with other beings. The idea of man controlling his own destiny became sharply enhanced. Before that, God was seen as the supreme source, remember? But now, man became the focus. And Shakespeare too believed in such ideas of humanism. There is also a mention of Machiavelli's The Prince and James Basilic Doran in your syllabus. So these are basically two works, that is The Prince and the Basilic Doran, written by Machiavelli and King James respective. So if we look at Machiavelli's The Prince, we can say that the usurper is considered as a shift from the king as divinely ordained. That is, he raises the question of how a ruler must perceive his power, whether the ruler must employ cruelty to perceive his power or not. Further, he raises the question whether the ruler should be feared or loved. So you will understand this better when we discuss the play Macbeth. So such a person who comes to power by illegal means can be termed as a usurper. So if you Google it, you will get the exact meaning of this term. So a king becomes a usurper. So that was a drastic change from the image of the king that was always prevalent in society. Society used to believe in the divine right theory of kings. That is, kings were the ones chosen by God to look after the people. That was the idea that was prevalent in the society. But by the mention of this usurper, things had a great shift. The divine sanity of the king is challenged by the usurper. Machiavelli in his treatise, that is the Prince, suggests both the method of operation and the sustenance of rule for the usurper. So that is what is mentioned here. So there is a contrast to the Prince in King James' Basilican Doran. So remember, Basilican Doran is written in the year 1599. So this work also deals with the ideas about the monarch, good governance and its relationship to its subject. The title is a Greek phrase translated as kingly gift. Basilican Doran is translated as kingly gift. So in this particular treatise, King James explains the difference between good king and an usurping tyrant. How a good and noble king like King Duncan, he hasn't mentioned the names, I'm giving you the example of King Duncan, is different from a tyrant. For example, let's consider Macbeth. So how they are different, and where the former is answerable to God and is ordained for his people, and the latter considers his people to be ordained for him. That is, the good king is answerable to God and is ordained for his people, whereas the tyrant, the bad king, the usurper, considers his people to be ordained for him. Honor for the good king meant a due discharge of his calling, but for the tyrant it rested in a realization of his ambitious pretenses. Yes, so this way of course in contrast to Machiavelli's idea. Yes. So now let's have a look at the drama in the Renaissance world. So if you look at page number 12, we can see the pictures of the stages in the Elizabethan period. So this is how stages were made during the Elizabethan period. So theatre in England evolved significantly in the 16th century. It was from the 16th century that theatres became active. So before that, the chief means of entertainment were acrobatics, bear baiting, etc. So people were involved in all such things. So it was theatre in the Elizabethan period that facilitated interaction with the audience. The structure of the Elizabethan theatre, that is the inn-yard, were transformed into the former stage of Elizabethan's time, and there were spaces for the gentry and the nobility, but the commoners were asked to stand in the pit. Shakespeare's formal theatrical association was with Lord Chamberlain's company. This company was patronized by Henry Carey. The theatre was owned by a group of people, and this group of people included Shakespeare as well. Theatre was a popular form of entertainment, and it also had a commercial side to it. Yes, you can see the pictures of the famous theatres of those times. Yes, there were many theatres during this period. For instance, one of the oldest theatres was Red Lion Theatre. The other famous theatres include Rose, Swan, etc. There was one theatre built by Shakespeare along with others. Do you know its name? It was the Globe Theatre, built in the year 1599. It continued till the year 1613, but it was burned down in this year 1613. So that ceased to exist. Have you heard of the two main groups of performing companies of those times? They were Admiral's men and Lord Chamberlain's men. Yes, the Admiral's men performed in the Rose Theatre, whereas the Lord Chamberlain's men performed in the Globe Theatre. So there were also private theatres in existence. The private theatres such as the Blackfriars Theatre was bought by Shakespeare and other partners in the year 1608. So there was a theatre bought by Shakespeare. It was called the Blackfriars. So if we look at the drama and censorship in the Elizabethan England, what do you mean by censorship? Yes. In the context of Elizabethan theatre, or in the context of Elizabethan England, the relation between performance of plays and the monarchy was complex. Watching plays was a popular pastime for the ordinary people, but at the same time, the plays made references to the existing structures of power as well. Hence, the gaze of censors was being directed towards the world of theatre and performance. Since there were mentions regarding the power and other aspects, there was strict censorship with respect to the Elizabethan theatre. The church represented a powerful space that framed the rules on which society rested, and the theatre became an alternative space to contest those normative ideas. On one side, there was the church, a powerful space with rules on which society had to exist. On the other hand, there was the theatre, which more or less became the alternative space where such norms were challenged to some extent. So if we look at the plays of the Elizabethan era, one notable thing is that those times there weren't any women actors. Then how did they used to perform? They used to perform with male actors dressed as if females. Men cross-dressed as women and performed in ways as flaunting the norms of social behavior. The fact that these were being watched by women themselves upset the social fabric and its guidelines of prescriptive behavior for women. Yes, you just have to keep those things in mind. Theatres were also shut down due to the repeated onset of plagues in England. Nevertheless, theatres, playgoing and performance were central to the Elizabethan life. Watching a performance was a social act binding the people and the world of the stage in complex ways. So this facilitated an intermingling of different social groups of men and women and had a bearing on the play written, performed and discussed. Understood? Now let's have a quick introduction to the date of the play that we are about to discuss, that is Macbeth. William Shakespeare's Macbeth is believed to have been written around 1606. This was the period after the ascension of King James I to the England throne. Remember, he was King James VI of Scotland and became the first Scottish king to become the monarch of England. Macbeth, this play, captures the tensions and contradictions that belong to the Jacobean age. Though there is no clear evidence regarding the dating of the play, scholars pitch for a date between 1599 and 1606. So if you look at the major sources of Macbeth, we can say that Macbeth is based on Raphael Holinshed's The Chronicles. The full title of this work is The Chronicles of England, Scotland and Ireland, written in the year 1587. Other historical documents that work their way into the play are John Major's A History of Greater Britain, written in the year 1521, and George Buchanan's History of Scotland, written in the year 1582. When we try to place Macbeth into the history, we can say that Macbeth was the 85th king of Scotland who ruled from 1040 to 1057 CE. He killed his predecessor, that is King Duncan, who was a noble king, and was succeeded by King Duncan's son, Malcolm III. The reconstruction of Macbeth in historical documents places him at the cross-section of the cultural and political history of the two countries. Which are the two countries? England and Scotland, as they are conjoined in the rule of King James I. Remember, King James I became the first Scottish king to become the monarch of England. King James I of England was King James VI of Scotland, and he became the first Scottish king to become the monarch of England. So these are the major points that you need to keep in mind. Macbeth is undoubtedly one of the greatest tragedies written by Shakespeare. As we discussed, the other three major tragedies include King Lear, Othello, and Hamlet.